Some of the operations shown on the table and radial arm saws are for photographic clarity. We strongly recommend that you work with guards in place. The drawer dimensions are made according to the opening in the cabinet faceplate, the cabinet depth, the type of drawer, and the type of drawer guide to be used.
I made a few notes while I measured the drawer opening. I know the height of the drawer, the width of the drawer, and how deep the opening is, and this helps me determine how long the drawer sides need to be. I have to subtract the thickness of the drawer front from that number 14 so that I don't have interference at the back. From these numbers I can develop a drawing, and here are a couple representative samples of drawings for drawers. If you're working with a cabinet, it's important that you have your measurements laid out like this. If you can draw it, you can build it. These specs also give you an idea and eliminate confusion either at the table saw or radial arm saw when you make the joinery. In instances where the joint is a little more difficult, you may want to blow up the corner and give us some detail, or give yourself some detail of exactly how the parts fit together. This is very useful because it helps you visualize how the parts should mate. Now if you're building the nightstand or the hall chest, you're going to find in the book, here's the print for the hall chest. You'll notice we have some exploded views here that show all of the dimensions that you need. You may find that you'll have to modify these a little bit just depending on how well you made your faceplates and how close to the dimensions you were. There's also details for the nightstand as well. And I think you'll agree this joinery is easy to follow. It gives you some details of the drawer sides, back, and just about anything you need to build the drawer. So these can be helpful if you're building this. Now if you're building your own cabinets or kitchen cabinets or something of that nature, you'll have to develop these drawings yourself. In either case, I think you'll find that the drawing and planning ahead will give you a better drawer, well worth the time to do the planning in the beginning. So I think we're ready to go to some of the machinery and do some of these cuts, make some drawer sides, and begin making the joinery.
Once the dimensions of the individual drawer pieces have been determined, they may be ripped or cross-cut to the desired size. The table saw or radial arm saw may be used to accurately cut your pieces.
I've squared up one end of this piece, and you can see there's some knots to be cut off. This is some of the stuff we glued up earlier. Now, what I want to do is cut my lengths. I've set a stock over here that I've clamped to a piece that extends from the fence. This gives me the lengths I want. This is actually 2 drawer sides for the nightstand. And the reason I've got 2 in this one piece is that it's just much easier to machine a longer piece. When I want to cut that groove on the radial arm saw or table saw, I feel much more secure working with a longer piece. I can then cut it into smaller pieces as I go. You can see when I cut this, I'm going to remove the knots and all the other rough stock on the end. So I cut this, and this is just how I would handle any other part. Remember, also later I could bring a stop in here to cut my pieces for the drawer size to exact length. We've got the machine set up in the router mode. This is a radial arm saw with a high-speed router bit set up for cutting a radius on the edge of the drawer for a decorative effect. Everything's set, and we're going to feed into the cutter rotation. I think we're ready to go, so we'll get started. real nice radius. There's a little bit of fuzz on here that's been caused by the grain of the wood. A little sandpaper will take that out. We'd always sand before we assemble our drawer anyway. We've got a nice drawer blank here ready to go, and I think we're ready to start considering cutting joinery. We're going to cut a rabbet joint on the sides of this drawer front. This is a flush drawer, that is, it'll sit in the opening, and 2 rabbets need to be cut, 1 at each side, and that'll allow us to attach the sides. A few tricks for the layout. One of the things we want to do is set this so there's just a little clearance. That allows the drawer sides to ride back a little bit behind the front, so the front fits right and there's a little clearance. We're going to butt our sliding or a combination square up like so, remove this, and now we can score a line here. This line determines exactly where the rabbet should begin. Now, we've set up the dado head. We've got a wobble dado head here, and we just cut a fresh dado here. Now this is the 2 shoulders of the dado we're presently cutting. If we position this so that I'm even with one side of the dado that's been cut in the fence, I can now clamp a stop like so. And this stop will allow me to make multiple cuts. That is, I can make this side, I can turn it around and cut the other side, and if I had 3 or 4 to do, I could do all of them with this same setting. You can see that I missed my line on the safe side. That is, I can cut a little bit more off, which is far better than cutting on the waste side or getting into the drawer. Now, a little tip here, I've got my stop set. You can see that I've got a certain amount of stock there. With a good eye, I can look at the distance from my line to the edge of the workpiece. I can come over here and move that stop the same amount. Now, in so doing, all I have to do is reposition my stock. I've still got ever so slight amount to remove. So we'll make this adjustment one more time. I've got a nice clean rabbet here. I've trimmed off my layout line. I can now go ahead, cut the other side, and progress into the rest of the cuts. If I had multiple drawers such as you'd have in the hall chest, you could then set it up so that all of the pieces could be cut exactly the same. This is doubly important if your drawers are even different sizes. This still locates it with reference to the thickness of the drawer sides, which is what we need to locate it to. So I'll go ahead and continue cutting. We're going to cut the rabbets for a drawer front on the 2 sides to mate with the drawer sides, and we set up the dado head to do so. We've got a 3/4 inch dado head on, and you can see that we've cut out part of the fence. This allows the dado head to be hidden under here so we can use only a portion of it to cut the rabbets. The height is roughly 3/8 of an inch so that it'll come up about to the midpoint of this side. Now, we mentioned that we want a little clearance. We can use our drawer side to adjust this rather than a ruler. You can see that I've hidden most of the dado head with the side, and there's just about a 1/16 of an inch clearance there. That will be the amount of clearance there be between the side, that is, the drawer side will be recessed about that much. This extra clearance will give us a better sliding operation when we're working with wooden guides. So all I've got to do now is plug in the saw and I'm ready to go. It's important that you have the good side up when you cut these rabbets, because any defects you want on the back of the drawer. So look your stock over, and once you're sure of how it's to be oriented, you can proceed. I think you can see here that we've hit the midpoint of the drawer front, and this provides adequate anchorage when we assemble this at the bench.
Drawer grooves can be cut using a dado head. The groove should be adjusted to the thickness of the drawer bottom. The distance from the drawer edge to the groove is usually 1/4 inch, but certain drawer guides require a greater distance. Dado cuts on the drawer sides accommodate the drawer back. Set the dado head to the thickness of the drawer back.
I've got a couple drawers here with the Dovetail-Dado joint on the front, and if you look at these you can see that there's a dado with angular sides cut in the drawer front, and the sides then lock into this. Now there are a few differences here. You might notice that the depth here is a little greater than it is here. You'll also notice that the angle here on the sides of the dovetail are greater than the angles on these sides. The angles vary depending on what you're doing, but right now these are at roughly 12 to 15 degrees. This one's about 9 or 10 degrees. This seems to be a more popular angle. You can look at your drawer. The depth of them and the width and the angle all depends on the size of the drawer and the thickness of the drawer front. If you'll notice here a couple other things, the sides have been recessed so that we can accommodate a side guide for the drawer. This is a metal guide that screws to the drawer side. Now, we then have to determine where things have to be oriented. I've laid out a piece here, and if we look at it, we can see the clearances are essentially the same. This gives us the clearance for the drawer opening and so forth. And then we've positioned where the drawer side needs to be. Now this drawer side, then, well, the sides of this determine how far out that dado has to flare or dovetail. So we've got that set up to make yet, and I'm going to set these aside and we're going to go ahead and do that. One of the first things we want to set is the approximate depth, and I'm going to set that for about ½ inch, 2/3 of the thickness of this 3/4 inch front. Now I need to set my angle, and I'm going to set the blade angle right now using the scale on the machine. I'll just look that over. It looks like I'm right on the 12-degree mark, so I think I'm ready to position my stock. These lines I've scored in the edge of a workpiece are my guidelines now. What I have to do is cut inside there so the corner of the blade contacts the line. Now I can do that very easily by starting in the middle and working out. That is, cutting in the waist and working toward the line. And I'll demonstrate that now. you can see that we've met up very nicely here with our edges. Now you say, okay, great, what do we do about the other side? Well, all we have to do the other side is simply bring our miter gauge over here and work this way. So now let's cut the other side. You can see that we have a slight angle at the edges there, and I can square this up at the bench with a chisel. I'll remove most of it now, and then I'll clean that up. Well, I squared out the bottom of these dovetails, and I'm quite pleased with the way they look. They're nice and flat. And that little bit that I've taken off the bottom was enough, so I've raised that blade just a 32nd or less, not very much. Now I've also brought my two drawer sides along and a piece of scrap setup stock. This scrap of setup stock is the same thickness, it's just a little wider, and I'm going to use this to make my test fits. This is important to begin with. Now, other than that, I haven't really changed much. The next thing I need to do is set my blade, or set my fence in relation to the blade, and I set it so at the table level, the blade is not removing any stock from the drawer side. That is, it goes in from that point, but doesn't take anything off the full width. Now, I have a setup piece here because it's important that you check this setup. This isn't something you just decide on and do. And I've got two ends to this, and I may need both of them. You can see a slight flat right along there, so there's just a little bit of wood left, and that's fine. That's a good place to begin. Now let's see how it fits. It's much too tight, and we can move that fence just a little bit. And how I like to move the fence a little bit is just move my thumb real close, like so. I'm very close. I'm too tight right now because glue would not stick in here. There's just no clearance for it. I'll check the other side as well, and I'm pretty good there. Just a little tight. So what I'll do now is I'll have to take a little bit more off. Well, what I'm going to do is, rather than change the fence because it's so little, I'm going to take a piece of paper, fold it in half, and put it in between my workpiece and the fence like so. And that will extend it over just a few thousandths. And that should give me a nice tight fit. Let's see what happens. That's real nice. With a little glue in there, that's going to be a fine fit. Well, I've got them fitted the way to my satisfaction now. You can see that they fit good and tight, and I've left them protrude a little bit here so you can see the fit. In checking these, I found that they were good and square. I was quite pleased with that. And I can say right now that all I have to do is position these, trim the tops a little bit, and then trim the backs, cut the dados in the back, and we'll be all set to assemble this drawer. The back will only come to the groove because we've got to slide the back in now. We can't separate this enough to put a full back in. So we'll cut the back off right at the groove. So we'll see those assembly techniques later. I've set up a couple scraps with a drawer corner joint here. You can see that the two lock together. This would be the front and this is the side. To make this joint, there's a number of considerations. This is the one we'll make, but there are other things that will affect how it goes together. For example, in this case, we've got a 3/8 overlay, or a rabbet type of front, a lip drawer as we would call it. So we've got to extend, we have to cut this rabbet before we can actually make the joint. The format is the same nevertheless, and we'll take it from this point and begin. For a flush drawer, we cut the drawer fronts to the exact size that they need to be. We have the fronts all cleaned up, and the front will go against the fence. Now what we'll do is first we'll set the distance from the blade to the fence, and that distance will be 3/8 of an inch with a 3/4 inch drawer front. I've got that positioned. Now the blade height should equal the thickness of the drawer side, because it should line up with the drawer, or the drawer front. That is, the side and the drawer front should be even. But we want a little clearance there, because if we had to adjust the fit, we don't want to have to shave off the drawer side. So we want a little bit of reveal, or a little bit more. We want the drawer front to protrude a little bit, stick out. So to do this, we can take this drawer side, set it down here, and raise the blade height slightly higher than the thickness of the drawer stock. There's just a little bit protruding. And I'll double check it with another piece. It's a little high. There it is. This piece is not the correct thickness for the drawer stock. Okay, that setting is correct now. Now what we're going to do is cut a dado in the sides, or through the end grain on both ends of the drawer front. The exposed face, or the front of the drawer, will face the fence. Now to give us a little more security while we do this, we can clamp an auxiliary fence on here. And this helps us hold the stock correctly while we make the cut. Now we could do this with a dado head as well, and we'll see some dado setups throughout, but for now we'll just use the blade, because parts of it will be cut with a blade as well. I think you can see the saw curve here, and I want to make that a little bit bigger. I'll go back to my example, and I think you'll see that the space in between is greater here. I think you can see that this is a little wider here. That is, the dado is a little wider on the setup than it is on the piece we're working on. So what we'll do is move the fence over to make a second cut in all the parts. and then we'll have almost the same setup. It doesn't matter if it's exactly the same because one piece fits the other and we adjust the fit accordingly. So what I can do is move this up into position like so. Then I can release the fence, move it over, and through a little trial and error, get my setting just right. So I'll cut it on here and see what I think. That looks to be about right. This is thick enough, and that gives us enough end grain across here that it won't break off easily. So I'll continue cutting, get these parts ready to go. It's important that you keep the front facing the fence for all these cuts. If you reverse apart, it could throw off your adjustments. Once those cuts are made, we can set the drawer fronts aside for a minute. We'll use one for a second to lay out our drawer fronts, or I mean our drawer sides. What we can do is use this in this fashion to determine positioning. You can see that I've lined up the front of the drawer side even with the dado. I can now mark these two marks. Now represent exactly where the dado will have to be cut. So now I've got to adjust a couple of things. First, I have to position this relative to the workpiece. And then we've got that blade set as high as the side is, and that's hardly appropriate now, is it? We want it about half the thickness of the side. So I'll drop the blade down to that approximate height. I've got a drawer side here, and I brought along another piece I can use to test my setup so I won't damage my drawer side if it's incorrect. I'll set my drawer side aside for a minute. I can now make my first cut. As you'll recall, the distance from the blade to the fence was determined after I used a layout off of this. Now, I'll use a miter gauge to control my workpiece. The first cut's in the right spot, but I've got to make it a little bigger. To do that, I can simply position my piece where it needs to be and mark it. Now, I have to ask myself which way the piece is going to be, so I mark the correct end. looks as if I've got it set. If anything, I'll be too tight. So I'll move the fence ever so slightly. I'll put my workpiece up against the fence, and I'll put a space between the fence and the workpiece there. And that's how much I've moved. Now I can butt it against the fence and make the cut. The fit is good. It isn't going the full depth. There's probably a little fuzz in the corner there. I can trim that out with a utility knife or a chisel. But now all I have to do is position my stock to where it'll be, or I can measure the depth. Okay, check the measure, and it's just short of 3/16. So what I'll do now is I'll measure off of this corner and score that. Now I've got to set it so the one that's in the front is positioned correctly. So there's my line. Now it should be the same on both sides, and to set this up we can do things just a little bit differently. We first have to move the fence, and now I'll take another miter gauge that I have prepared. It has an auxiliary face on it. That's this piece of wood here. What this allows me to do is position my workpiece, then clamp a stop. Like so. Now I can make the cut and turn the piece around and cut the opposite side. The other important thing to consider now is I don't want that blade height too high. I want it to cut off the lower portion, yet I don't want it to cut into the top portion of the drawer front. So what I've got to do now is look from the side, and I can see that I'm not going to hit the front of the drawer front. So now I can position my stock. One last check. Looks like I'm positioned correctly. I'm ready to cut. Turn the piece around. And we've now shortened up the part that protrudes into the side. Still a little tight. This side fits a little bit better. And it looks as if I'm going to have to trim just a little bit more to get that right. I would say the distance in here will determine how much more I have to trim that. So I'll readjust and get the fit I need. Side's still a little tight. With a little bit of fine tuning, this will be perfect. There's a little bit of chisel work that needs to be done, but I'm happy with this. The fit now is quite good. There's a little chisel work to be done, and that's fine. It's just a little bit of bench work, and I can clamp this up. What you see there will turn into something like the joints here. This isn't glued yet, but you can get a good idea of how the fit ought to be. These sides have been radius, the others were square. Those are just little details that you might want to change on the drawer you built. This is the type of fit. We have a rabbet on here for a 3/8 offset drawer or 3/8 lip drawer. This would be a flush drawer because the side will be flush. All of these are little variations that you have to take into account when you plan your drawer. It's best to always practice on a scrap before you try any of these joints because you can waste a lot of wood if you don't. A little practice goes a long way in this type of work. One other variation of this joint that I want to show you very quickly encompasses the same front, and here's the same front. Remember, we cut two of those. Now, rather than cut just into through that front part, we're going to cut into the drawer front as well. That is to say, we've raised the blade up almost to the complete thickness of the drawer front. And when I cut this, you can see that I have a T-shaped or almost a plus-oriented type of slot here. A two-way dado, if you will. This is called a locking corner joint. This type of joint will finish up to look like this. Now, the type of work that's involved here, and I think you can appreciate it, is far greater, maybe I should put it over here like this, far greater than any of the others. There, that's what I wanted to do. The type of joinery is far greater challenge than the other type. You're going to find that there's a lot more work and a lot more patience because you have to cut a tongue on the front of the drawer side before you cut the dado. This is definitely one of the joints where you're going to want to practice and do some test work beforehand. Work carefully, take your time, work on scrap first. You'll be glad and you'll be pleased with the results if you do it that way.
The finished drawer pieces are now ready for assembly.
We've got this drawer ready to glue up, but we thought we'd better sand all the inside surfaces before we assemble it. That's our last chance. Once this is formed into a box, it's very difficult to sand the inside. Something else you might consider is finishing this before you assemble it. For example, a light coat of clear lacquer on all of these and then sand it on the inside will give you a real nice finish. This drawer here was lacquered before assembly and then glued up. The neat thing here is, if you'll notice, the front has been stained to match the cabinet and the sides are pure white. If you had to stain the back side of here after assembly, you probably would drip some stain on the inside. So this drawer front was finished as an individual part and then the drawer was glued up. You might try this sometime, and then when your friends ask you how do you handle the stain so carefully, you can tell them that you use masking tape. Fool them a little bit. At any rate, this drawer we're not going to finish. We're going to assemble it and give you the ideas of how it goes together. Well, we're going to use our glue sparingly. We've laid our clamps out and they're prepared. I'm going to set my sander aside, get some glue, and I'm going to put just a light bead in these grooves here, the dados we cut earlier. I won't put anything in the drawer groove because the bottom should float by itself. Again, just a light bead. In this case, I don't have to worry about the drawer bottom because it's not captured in the unit. I can slide in anytime I wish. Before I clamp it, I'll slide it in though. That'll help align the parts, get everything into alignment, and also help pull the drawer into square. Now, set the drawer in like so, with 2 clamps under it. And I'll just lightly make sure my clamps are straight, lightly snug those up. And then I can check to see if I am square. Things are looking real good, so I'll put the other 2 clamps on now. We've installed the guides on the sides of the drawer, and we've got mating parts that we'll have to install in the cabinet. This is about all we can do here at the bench with this drawer, and we'll go over to the cabinet itself and fit the guides, the mating parts of the guides, to the cabinet. We've got our drawer made up and we've attached our drawer sides to it. We now have to install the mating parts of the drawer sides in the cabinet. This will take a little work. First we have to put a piece of plywood in here. And this piece of plywood will provide a anchorage for our drawer sides. And I'll have to put one over here as well. This one will have to be shimmed, and I'll show you how that's done. This one's ready to go because I have already shimmed to hold the mating drawer side in. So I'll put a little glue on here. Position my piece. Now I've made up 2 cleats here, small pieces of stock that can be attached inside the cabinet. And when I do that, that'll provide me the correct spacing so that this side will be even with the faceplate. All we have to do now is attach these and then attach this piece to it. Got to be sure I turn these the right way or I can run into problems. That's the correct way. So I'll mark a little X on the side that needs to be out. Check the other piece and mark it as well. This avoids confusion and mistakes after the glue starts to set up. Once those are anchored, all I've got to do is put a little glue on this piece, along this edge, and then the back edge, and I can position it as well. Preparation here is very important so that everything lines up, so the fit is right. Now when you make a drawer for this type of opening, they specify a 1/2 inch clearance on each side. That means the drawer is 1 inch smaller. If anything, it should be 1 1/16 inch smaller instead of 15/16 smaller. That way you could always shim the side of a guide. If you have to cut into the side of the drawer to make it fit, it's very difficult to fit. So let's mark this so we can position our guides on the side. First we want a straight line, so we'll put the square on our cabinet like so and mark this. This gives us a nice line to position the bottom of the guide. Now I'm going to hold the guide back ever so slightly on the faceplate. It's resting on the faceplate. Now I can go down and eyeball the back and attach it. These guides have a little bit of latitude in them so that you can adjust them later if needed. Now let's position the front one. Again, I'll eyeball it back with my line. Looks pretty good right there. Now let's test the fit to get an idea what type of adjustments might be needed. That looks pretty good. It could come up along the bottom. We're almost dragging there, and I can raise it very easily. I raised it a bit. Take it up just a little bit more. That looks to be a little better clearance. Now you can see that this goes back, but when we put the false front or the decorative front on here, and we'll do that in a minute, we'll be able to hold that right where it needs to be. Now we've got this one and we want to match, so let's just copy our lines here. This gives us our height. We can put a real light line here, real light line here, then we can position this straight edge on that line. Now the drawer front can rest there. Say, well, how much of an overlap do we want? We can measure how much is extended here. It's a 1/2 inch. Set this for 1/2. This clamp should hold me securely while I drive the screws. Don't want to mash the front there. I'll use 4 screws. Now, I think we're about ready to remove the clamp. Pull the drawer out, release it, and you can see that I have 4 hardened screws holding that front on. The drawers match. I can go on from here to handle the other details of the cabinetry. I've got 2 nightstands here with typical problems that we frequently have with fits on wooden guides. This one here is a little tight and there's some rubbing at the back. One of the things you can do when you feel this rubbing, people say, well, where do I take wood away from the drawer? While moving it around, you will look at the bottom or the sides and inspect it, and you'll find that the wood will shine where the wear is, and that shining will tell us just exactly where stock ought to be removed. So you can use this as an indicator to determine where to trim this. The shine may not be real visible here, but it goes from about here to here. So I could take a scraper and lightly remove a little wood here to improve that fit. Another thing that frequently happens is people say, well, I've got ideal clearances, but look at all the wood exposed, or look at the opening at the top of this cabinet. This can be a problem and it looks bad. One of the things you might do in this case is simply take a thumbtack and position it here on each side, and those thumbtacks then will lift the drawer sides and change that clearance so that it's right. Let's see what happens now. Now we have a small exposure at the bottom, If we wanted a little more, we could pry those tacks up ever so slightly until we get it balanced exactly where we want. So these little tips will help make it easier for you to adjust your drawers. Think about these things when you fit them. I think that you'll find that the drawers will work much smoother and look much better. Well, this is the final drawer for the nightstands. We've got drawers in all the other cabinets. Hopefully you've picked up a few of the ideas about drawer construction, drawer guides, some of the secrets and tips for adjustment. A few things you might have missed are down here. Secret drawer assembly. If I told you that, it wouldn't be a secret.
Your finished drawer has now been assembled into the cabinet. With the drawer complete, we're now ready to begin construction of the cabinet door. Additional video modules are available regarding all aspects of cabinet making, from beginning to advanced construction.